Hello, and welcome back to Hope is Kindled, where we look to the great works of art, literature, and culture that dare to challenge, provoke, and unsettle us. Works that remind us that true art was never meant to be safe. It was meant to wake us up. Some books come to us like sermons, others like whispers. And then there are the dangerous ones, the ones that tear through the polite fabric of society, laughing as they go. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is one of those. Before we start down the path with Hunter, I want to start by saying that I have had David Bowie, the patron saint of reinvention, on my mind often these days. As the man who showed us that the self is not a fixed point but a constellation, shifting, burning, collapsing, being reborn, Bowie's work is so often more apropos than we would like to admit. Bowie understood something Hunter understood too. That when the world becomes unbearable, when the pressure gets too strange or too cruel, you don't disappear, you transform. There's a line in Heroes where Bowie sings like he's clawing his way through the smoke of his own life, and for just one day, he finds strength enough to stand. That's what Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is, in its own twisted way. A story about what it means to stand for just one moment, when everything around you is falling apart. And tonight, that's where we begin. Written by the outlaw journalist Hunter S. Thompson. This book is a hallucinatory descent into the American psyche, a road trip through the death of the 1960s counterculture and the decay of the dream that once promised freedom. It's wild, grotesque, often deeply uncomfortable. But it's also one of the most searing and honest portraits of a generation that tried to change the world, only to wake up hungover on the other side of history. Thompson, the godfather of gonzo journalism, lived on the edge of reality. He wasn't a spectator. He was the story. His eccentricity was legendary, his political views feral and uncompromising, his relationship with drugs somewhere between experiment and exorcism. He sought truth not in sobriety, but in the chaos of experience, a kind of savage honesty that left no one, least of all himself, untouched. And then there's the film, Terry Gilliam's 1998 adaptation, starring Johnny Depp as Raoul Duke and Benicio del Toro as Dr. Gonzo. It's as dangerous as the novel, and perhaps even more hypnotic. A cinematic fever dream that drags us through the wreckage of the American promise, laughter echoing through madness. Only after we've been immersed in that madness do we finally hear the line, the one that defines it all.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
From that moment on, the descent is complete. What begins as a drug-fueled joyride becomes something else entirely, an autopsy of the American dream itself. Beneath the mescaline and the absurdity, Thompson was chronicling a loss of faith in politics, in progress, in idealism, and in the myth that America could ever be what it pretended to be. This is not an easy text. At first glance, the novel seems purely chaotic, but that chaos is the point, a reflection of a nation overdosed on its own mythology. Fear and Loathing is an infernal odyssey, the Odyssey by way of Dante's Inferno. Vegas is hell. Duke is both Dante and Virgil, documenting the descent. The prose shifts from mania to poetry to journalism, forcing us to feel the same vertigo the author lived. Raoul Duke is haunted by cultural PTSD, the fallout of broken ideals and commercialized rebellion. Dr. Gonzo is his ID incarnate, violence, impulse, and rage unrestrained. Where Chief Bromden in Cuckoo's Nest is fogged by oppression, Duke and Gonzo are fogged by choice, because reality itself is unbearable. Fear and Loathing is chaotic, repulsive, magnetic, and profound. But if we are brave enough to face it, to look through the smoke and the madness, we find what Thompson found. That even at the end of the dream, the human spirit keeps searching, desperate to believe that somewhere out there, beyond the desert and the ruin, hope still burns. Hunter S. Thompson wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas at a moment when America itself was suffering a hangover from the 1960s. The decade that had promised peace, love, and revolution ended in exhaustion and betrayal. The Vietnam War raged on, its casualties climbing into the hundreds of thousands. Richard Nixon's presidency oozed paranoia and corruption. Kent State, Altamont, and the Manson murders shattered the illusion that idealism could survive contact with reality. Published in 1971, and first serialized in Rolling Stone, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas tells the story of journalist Raoul Duke, the thinly veiled alter ego of Hunter S. Thompson, and his Simone attorney, Dr. Gonzo. Their supposed assignment is simple: cover the Mint 400, a motorcycle race in the blazing Nevada desert. But what begins as journalism quickly dissolves into delirium. Their car, a blood-red Chevy convertible, is packed with a staggering inventory of narcotics, ether, mescaline, LSD, cocaine, amyls, and alcohol in impossible quantities. What follows is not a report, but a descent, a frantic hallucinatory odyssey through the shimmering mirage of the American dream.
"This is the room,"
Duke says.
"The American dream. It seemed like a pretty good place to look for it."
The narrative defies every traditional rule of storytelling. There is no moral arc, no redemption, no clear beginning or end. Instead, there is only a spiral, a relentless unraveling of the illusion that America is still what it pretends to be. Once again, the chaos is the point. Because in Thompson's hands, the madness becomes metaphor. The drugs, the frenzy, the paranoia, all of it is America on acid, staring at its own reflection and laughing before the crash. For Thompson, who had chronicled both the rise and fall of the counterculture, this was the breaking point. The movement had imploded. The dream had been sold out. And so, he invented a new way to write about it: gonzo journalism. This was not journalism in the traditional sense. It was immersive, confessional, and reckless. It blurred truth and hallucination until the two became indistinguishable. In Thompson's world, the reporter was not an observer. He was the story. He once wrote,
"In a closed society where everybody's guilty, the only crime is getting caught. In a world of thieves, the only final sin is stupidity."
That was the gospel according to Gonzo, a worldview in which morality was warped, but honesty still mattered. Thompson was not merely mocking America, he was dissecting it. He saw, as Orwell had, the machinery of corruption and power. He saw, as Kerouac and Kesey had, the restless wanderers trying to outrun conformity. But, while Orwell warned and Kesey dreamed, Thompson laughed, a manic, defiant, desperate laugh echoing through the ruins of hope. And yet, even in that laughter, there was something human. A pulse. A cry. A reminder that beneath the madness and the self-destruction, there was still something left worth saving. Because when you strip away the spectacle, the hallucinations, the absurdity, the American nightmare, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is ultimately about loss. The loss of innocence. The loss of faith. And the faint, flickering hope that by naming the madness, we might one day learn from it. Hunter S. Thompson didn't just create a style in gonzo journalism, he created a species. The gonzo mind was a mutation of journalism, art, and madness. It was the reporter as participant, the truth teller as outlaw, the observer as mirror. Hunter believed that the only honest way to write about a collapsing culture was to jump into the chaos yourself, to live it, feel it, and survive long enough to send the dispatches back. He wasn't just chronicling America's fall, he was inside the wreckage, typing by the light of his own explosion. In one haunting moment, Raoul Duke, Thompson's stand-in, encounters a waitress in a rundown diner on the outskirts of Las Vegas. She is quiet and efficient.
You could tell by the way she handled the big silver coffee urn, she was a pro.
Duke calls her the mutant, but not out of cruelty. She's no monster. She's a mirror. She represents moral exhaustion, the spiritual corrosion that comes from surviving too long in a world that no longer values decency. Her numbness isn't evil, it's armor. A defense mechanism in a place that eats kindness alive. Through her, Thompson asks the essential question: what has this place done to its people? What happens to empathy in a culture that worships money? What happens to kindness when the dream dies, when compassion itself becomes a liability? The waitress is not a villain. She's the ghost of the American dream, still serving coffee long after the customers have stopped believing in hope. She's what's left behind when humanity gets outsourced to survival. And, in her blank stare, Thompson sees us all, tired, jaded, and still, somehow, showing up for the next shift. If the waitress is the ghost, then Dr. Gonzo is the storm, a force of nature without restraint, the embodiment of the unfiltered ID. He's not comic relief. He's chaos. He terrifies because he acts without inhibition. He mocks, threatens, and destroys, then collapses into despair. He's not a villain. He's a manifestation of a deeper sickness.
There was no point in arguing with a man who was doing exactly what he wanted to do.
That's Thompson's warning. Gonzo is freedom without direction, rage without compass. He's terrifying, not because he's cruel, but because he's free. And that's the tragedy. Freedom without empathy becomes destruction. In trying to escape the system, Gonzo becomes its darkest reflection, impulsive, violent, untethered, and alone. Dr. Gonzo was inspired by Oscar Zeta Acosta, a real Mexican-American lawyer, writer, and civil rights activist. A man as brilliant and volatile as Thompson himself. Acosta fought police brutality, ran for sheriff of Los Angeles County, and championed the rights of the Chicano community during the height of the civil rights movement. When Thompson wrote Fear and Loathing, he fictionalized Acosta as Samoan, a choice Acosta both resented and understood. Recognizing it as part of Thompson's myth-making, a way of blurring identity to tell a larger truth about alienation in America. Acosta was as much a revolutionary as he was a risk. He pushed boundaries, defied authority, and, in his own way, tried to live the dream that America had already buried. In 1974, Oscar Zeta Acosta disappeared in Mexico. Vanished completely. No body. No trace. Just gone. And in that vanishing act, Thompson saw the perfect metaphor. A man who fought for justice swallowed by the very world he was trying to change. Acosta's disappearance mirrors America's own vanishing conscience, a nation so consumed by its image that it lost its reflection. Together, Duke and Gonzo form the two halves of Thompson's psyche. The observer and the participant, the writer and the destroyer, the dreamer and the cynic. They are America talking to itself, a dialogue between what we were, what we are, and what we might still be if we ever dare to wake up. The Gonzo mind is what happens when clarity and chaos collide, when truth becomes unbearable, but you tell it anyway. Thompson used madness as a magnifying glass. He amplified the noise until we could finally hear the silence underneath. And in that silence, buried beneath the laughter, the violence, the neon, and the drugs, we hear something faint but unmistakable, a conscience, a longing, a stubborn flicker of hope. Because even in his most unhinged moments, Hunter S. Thompson believed that writing could still change things. That the act of witnessing, of naming the corruption, of refusing to go numb, was the last, defiant heartbeat of the American soul. Powerful sentiment indeed. Exactly what we have been advocating in the written word from the outset. To truly understand Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, we have to look at where it came from and the strange, electric ecosystem of art and rebellion that gave birth to it. Hunter S. Thompson didn't appear in a vacuum. He was part of a lineage, a constellation of outsiders who burned too brightly to be ignored. He shared spiritual territory with Ken Kesey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and leader of the Merry Pranksters, that wild, technicolor band of dreamers who took LSD across America in a painted bus called Further. In fact, in 1965, it was Thompson who introduced Kesey's pranksters to the Hells Angels, fusing two of the most notorious tribes of the American counterculture. That meeting became the stuff of legend, a collision of mythologies, intellect, and chaos. The writer who would chronicle Hell's Angels brought them face to face with the psychedelic prophets of peace and perception. And somewhere in that volatile intersection, between Kesey's joyful hallucinations and Thompson's savage reality, the modern counterculture took form. Both men were trying to do the same impossible thing, to wake America up from its illusions. Kesey used wonder. Thompson used fire. Thompson's voice was anarchic, blistering, and impossible to ignore. His eccentricity wasn't performance, it was philosophy. He lived his writing, gunfire and whiskey, mescaline and manifesto, His political views were wild and unpredictable, scorched by distrust of both power and conformity. His relationship with drugs wasn't indulgence, it was inquiry, an attempt to see the world unfiltered, to peel back the polite skin of American hypocrisy. That makes Fear and Loathing not just dangerous, but necessary. Because art, at its best, is never safe. It is supposed to shake the walls, strip away comfort, and leave us staring at what's real. This novel and its film adaptation are dangerous precisely because they refuse to lie. Terry Gilliam's film, with Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro, amplifies that chaos until it feels like truth in motion, a kind of cinematic breakdown that mirrors Thompson's own. I'll admit, I saw the movie many, many times before I ever opened the book. And I loved every unhinged frame of it. When I finally read Thompson's words, I was shocked by how familiar they felt, how perfectly they matched the manic heartbeat of the film. That discovery led me deeper, to The Rum Diary, Fear and Loathing in America, Hell's Angels, and eventually the documentary Gonzo. Each revealed more of the man behind the madness, a journalist, philosopher, comedian, and prophet rolled into one. In truth, I think of Thompson the same way I think of David Bowie, as an artist who lived on the edge of identity, reinventing himself in public, embodying every contradiction of his age. Both were mirrors for the people watching them, dazzling, uncomfortable, and full of truth disguised as spectacle. Bowie set the counterculture to music. Thompson gave it words. And if you trace that current back through time, you reach Ken Kesey, whose psychedelic experiments, both literary and chemical, helped birth the landscape that Thompson would later torch. It's fitting, then, that reading Thompson and listening to Bowie feel like acts of rebellion even now. Both speak to something essential in us, that restless need to see clearly, to break free from systems that dull the soul. They remind us that the counterculture wasn't just about drugs or defiance, it was about honesty, about finding meaning in chaos, about surviving with integrity when the world spins itself into madness. That's what this work, and this episode, are about. The courage to look at the world, as Thompson did, and say, this is what I see, this is what we've become, and somewhere in this mess, there must still be hope. Can all agree that Hunter S. Thompson's wild and eccentric writing was never meant to sit quietly on a shelf. As we have seen in this episode alone, it was meant to explode, to be shouted, misquoted, tattooed, sampled, and remembered long after the acid has worn off. His prose is a cocktail of poetic fury and philosophical despair, a gospel for the disenchanted, written in ink and ether. These lines have outlived the book itself, becoming fragments of cultural DNA, adopted by musicians, filmmakers, rebels, dreamers, and anyone who ever looked at the world and thought, this can't be all there is.
Too weird to live, and too rare to die.
This may be the single most iconic line of the Gonzo era. Johnny Depp's voice immortalized it in Terry Gilliam's film, and it's been printed on posters, shirts, and album covers for decades. But it's more than a clever tagline, it's a eulogy. Thompson is describing the death of Dr. Gonzo, yes, but also of himself, of every soul that doesn't fit neatly into the machinery of civilization. The line captures the paradox of individuality in a culture that demands conformity. Too weird to live, meaning you'll never be fully accepted. Too rare to die, meaning you'll never be forgotten. It's the curse of those who see too much, who feel too deeply, who dare to live authentically in a world allergic to truth. It's defiance wrapped in poetry.
There was madness in any direction, at any hour. You could strike sparks anywhere.
That sentence reads like prophecy, a description not just of 1971, but of our current moment. Everywhere Thompson looked, he saw volatility, the chaos of a nation drunk on its own contradictions. But within that madness, he also saw a possibility. You could strike sparks anywhere. That's not nihilism, it's creative potential. It's the recognition that art, rebellion, and beauty often grow from the same soil as insanity. It's the idea that when everything is breaking down, anything can be reborn. That's the paradox of fear and loathing, despair and hope sharing the same bloodstream. And then, the elegy. The line that feels like the final transmission from a dying prophet.
We had all the momentum. We were riding the crest of a high and beautiful wave. So now, less than 5 years later, you can go up on a steep hill in Las Vegas and look west. And with the right kind of eyes, you can almost see the high water mark, that place where the wave finally broke and rolled back.
That passage is one of the most beautiful pieces of prose ever written about the death of idealism. It's the requiem for the 1960s, for peace, for hope, for the belief that love and reason could change the world. But it's also timeless. Because the wave isn't just that decade. It's every decade. Every generation that believes it's finally building something better and then watches it collapse under the weight of greed, apathy, and exhaustion. You can see that same high watermark in every movement that burned bright and faded. In the civil rights marches, the protests, the art collectives, the punk scenes, the digital utopias, all of it. Every time the world almost changes but doesn't. That's the heartbreak Thompson captured so perfectly. He saw that America's tragedy wasn't failure. It was forgetfulness. The inability to remember what that wave felt like when it was still rising.
Buy the ticket. Take the ride.
Perhaps Thompson's most quoted, most misunderstood, and most essential line. It's the purest distillation of the gonzo philosophy, equal parts resignation and courage. It's a commandment, a dare, and a confession all at once. On the surface, it sounds like bravado, the mantra of the reckless. But beneath that swagger lies something deeply existential. To Thompson, buy the ticket, take the ride meant owning your choices. It meant accepting the consequences of curiosity, the cost of freedom, the chaos of truth. He believed that once you commit to seeing reality, once you take that ticket, there's no way to unsee it. You can't get off the ride halfway through. You can't pretend you didn't know. That's what makes it terrifying. To live authentically in Thompson's world is to embrace both the thrill and the terror of being awake. You take the ride not because it's safe, but because it's real. And that, in essence, is the thesis of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. That truth, however twisted, however ugly, is better than sleepwalking through someone else's dream. Thompson's words endure because they feel like fragments of our collective conscience, reminders of what happens when a nation trades meaning for spectacle, and when a human being trades curiosity for comfort. His writing may seem like a fever dream, but it's also a mirror. You can laugh at it, quote it, or even run from it, but once you've read it, you'll never look at America, or yourself, the same way again. Because the world is still mad. There's a moment in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas that stops you cold. Amid the madness, the absurdity, the wild humor, there's a sentence that cuts through everything, not shouted, not exaggerated, but spoken almost with a sigh. It's Hunter S. Thompson at his most devastatingly honest.
You can't really miss what you never had.
As we have said before, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is not just a story, it's an autopsy. And the body on the table is the American dream. The cause of death? Delusion. A slow cultural poisoning. A dream once built on hard work, courage, and integrity, replaced by vanity, greed, and self-deception. Thompson didn't write this book to celebrate chaos. He wrote it to expose what America had become, a carnival of excess, a hallucination sold back to its people by advertisers and politicians. He saw that the dream had been hijacked, turned into a product, printed on billboards, wrapped in neon, and consumed like junk food. He didn't hate America. He mourned it. This is not a good town for psychedelic drugs, he wrote. Reality itself is too twisted. That line is funny on the surface, but terrifying underneath. Because what he's really saying is that when truth itself becomes distorted, when lies are easier to swallow than honesty, the American dream starts to rot from the inside. Thompson understood that corruption doesn't destroy a country overnight. It erodes it slowly, one compromise at a time, until good people stop being shocked by evil and simply stop caring. That's when the dream dies. But even in that decay, Thompson's voice burns with something fierce and essential, hope through outrage. He believed that the act of seeing clearly, of naming the sickness, was itself a kind of salvation. Because to speak truth, even in madness, is to keep the heart of democracy alive. He wasn't a prophet of despair. He was a chronicler of disappointment, a man who still believed that if we faced the mirror honestly, maybe, just maybe, we could still become what we were meant to be. So yes, the dream may have died in the desert, but hope remains in the voice that refuses to go silent, in the pen that keeps moving, in the heart that still dares to care. Because once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. And that, perhaps, is where a new dream begins. Thompson stands at the end of this lineage, the last torchbearer in a tradition of artists who tried to warn us that illusion and comfort would kill us faster than fear. But he does something different. He doesn't moralize. He laughs, screams, and drinks his way through the wreckage, daring us to look, to see what's left after all the beauty burns away. Each of these comparisons is a mirror in a funhouse, distorted, yes, but reflecting the same fundamental truth, that every civilization, every generation, must choose between illusion and awareness. There's an old Bukowski line that feels carved for this moment.
What matters most is how well you walk through the fire.
Thompson walked through it with gasoline in his boots, Bukowski with a cigarette and a half-broken heart, Bowie with a different face every decade, reinventing himself every time the world tried to pin him down. Each of them teaches us the same thing in their own language of chaos. The fire doesn't mean you're finished. It means you're being forged. Bowie's voice reminds us that identity isn't fixed. You can be the starman, the thin white duke, the one who falls to earth, the one who rises again. You can shed the version of yourself that was wounded by someone else's blindness and step into a new skin without apology. And Bukowski reminds us that broken people still build beautiful things. That the ones bruised by life, the ones overlooked, the ones who feel too strange or too hopeful, those are often the ones with the deepest fire. The rare ones. The prototypes. Thompson reminds us to keep going. To face the weirdness of life head on. To roar back at the world when it gets violent or indifferent. To ride forward even when the road disappears under the tires. Because sometimes survival is rebellion. And sometimes hope arrives disguised as madness. And all of that, the bruises, the reinvention, the defiance belongs here, in this story, in this world. In this work of hunters that refuses to let us sleepwalk through our own lives. In the end, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas isn't just a drug trip or a satire, it's a lament. It's an obituary for the American dream, written in ink and ether. But buried in the laughter, the violence, and the absurdity is the same truth that threads through every episode of this series. That even in madness, there is humanity. Even in cynicism, there is still the faint outline of belief. Art like this reminds us that hope doesn't always come softly. Sometimes it roars. Sometimes it breaks things. Sometimes it hurts. But if it forces us to see ourselves, if it stirs the ashes of awareness, then it is doing exactly what art was always meant to do. So keep your eyes open, even when the world gets loud. Bowie once said,
"We can be heroes just for one day."
But he forgot to mention the truth people like us know deep down. Some days, simply standing up again is heroism. Some days, walking through the fire is enough. Some days, refusing to quit on yourself is the rebellion that keeps the dream alive. And Bukowski would nod, light another cigarette, and mutter,
If you're going to try, go all the way.
Hunter would grin like a wolf behind aviators and whisper,
Buy the ticket, take the ride.
And somewhere out there, in the smoke, past Barstow, past the fear and the loathing, in the neon, in the desert heat, the dream is still flickering, still stubborn, still possible. Good journey. Always.